Hello challengers, welcome back for part 2 of our video on how to fill in a TGO challenge route sheet.
In part 1, which you can find via the link in the description below or in the top corner of the screen now, we covered how to fill in the top and bottom sections of the route sheet, as well as how to fill in the route description for a route that does not require a foul weather alternative.
In part 2, our focus is everything you need to know about foul weather alternatives and how to write them into your route sheet, covering both simple one-day FWAs and a more complicated multi-day example. So let's get started.
It hopefully won't surprise you when I say that the weather in Scotland isn't always calm, glorious sunshine with perfect views from mountain summits or idyllic days walking along the glens. The most likely adverse weather conditions are rain and low cloud, with poor visibility, most likely on the tops, but sometimes extending down to the glens, making navigation more challenging even at low level if you've got a pathless stretch. Snow is also a distinct possibility in May, not too much of a problem, although not necessarily pleasant at the time if it's just falling on you, but more of an issue if it's lying either as slippery wet fresh snow or as cornices or snowbanks which may be icy and require winter equipment or may be soft. Water crossings are probably the biggest hazard on the TGO challenge, as burns and rivers are everywhere and they become bigger obstacles at lower levels. They can rise and fall remarkably quickly, going from an innocuous burn to an uncrossable torrent in short order. Let's start by talking about when a foul weather alternative is needed. In the event details, there is a list of locations that always need an FWA, but this list only covers the places that crop up a lot in challengers' routes. It wouldn't be possible to write an exhaustive list. So, on top of that list, you will also need to state an alternative route for any day that crosses exposed high ground, but the need for an FWA isn't solely determined by height. The route vetters will also look at the nature of the terrain in question, how long you'll be in a high exposed position, and whether there is a path on that route. They will also take into account your level of experience. It's not just high ground that needs FWAs. They are also needed at lower levels if there are unbridged burns and rivers that may be impossible to cross safely if water levels are running high.
Now let's look at the first example route, which is a day including a single Munro, taking us from Ballater to Tarfside. As we've already looked in detail at how to write a straightforward route description in part 1 of this video, we'll gloss over the bit of the route sheet that takes us from Ballater to Water of Taynar and pick up the route from there. On our main route from Water of Taynar, we're going to follow the Mount Road up and over Mount Keene and down to Queenswell. The track down Glen Mark takes us to the road at Orcrony, then the track via West Bank leads us to Tarfside. On our route sheet, the relevant part of our route will be abbreviated as Mount Road over Mount Keene, Queenswell, south east to Orcrony, track to Tarfside via West Bank. The distance and ascent are rounded to 28 kilometres and 1,170 metres, and the overnight halt point is Tarfside. It's not essential to know your hill classifications, but if you do, then you can put an M in brackets after the hill name to denote a Munro, as I've done here, and for a Corbett you can use a C. As there is a high summit over 700 metres involved in this route, in the high day column we change no to yes. The foul weather alternative here is straightforward, as we're just going to bypass the summit of Mount Keene using the bypass path, so that's what we'll state on the route sheet in the foul weather alternative row for the same day. As above, but avoid Mount Keene using bypass path to west, rejoin main route at track to Queenswell. We then insert the distance and ascent for the whole day, taking the route variation into account, which in this case isn't vastly different from the main route, at 28 kilometres and 1,000 metres. In the overnight halt column, you can either say Tarfside again, or, as above, would be equally acceptable. By definition, a foul weather alternative cannot be a high day, so the final column can be left saying no.
The same principles would apply if you were doing a ridge with multiple tops, except that if you're going to be at height for a considerable period, it's advisable to consider escape routes and note them in the foul weather alternative box too. In this example, the dark blue line is the main route, the light blue line is the foul weather alternative, and the red route is an escape route. This is our own real-life example from the challenge in 2012 when we ascended from a calm glen to find it too windy to make progress along the ridge, so we immediately opted for our escape route back down to the glen.
Mount Keene and the Mamsell Ridge are relatively simple examples, but sometimes an FWA needs to span more than one day, and things can get complicated if separate days within a route need separate foul weather alternatives. For example, if you plan to go from Braemar to Tarfside via Jocks Road and Glen Clover, then this is a multi-day route that will require a multi-day foul weather alternative. Let's have a look at this example. We're going to leave Braemar on the minor road to the west of Cluny Water and cross the bridge and the A93 near Aucallata before taking the track up Callata Burn to Lochallata Lodge where, after a short half day, we'll spend the night. The following day we'll head up Jocks Road, taking a short detour to the summit of Tolmount as it's so close, before continuing down Jocks Road into Glendale to the road end at Acharn. The minor road will then take us for a night of luxury at the Clover Hotel. On the third day we'll take the track up to Loch Brandy and Green Hill, then go via Muckle Cairn and Burnt Hill to Glen Effock and the minor road, then on to Tarfside to camp on the green. This will be filled in succinctly on the route sheet in the same way as the examples we've already looked at, as shown on the screen now. Don't forget that, as discussed in part 1 of the video, grid references are always given to 6 digits only. The foul weather alternatives become a little convoluted, as one is needed for the first 2 days to avoid the top of Jocks Road, and the natural option here is for a 3-day foul weather alternative via Geldeshiel and Sheelin of Mark. However, what happens if you've enjoyed splendid weather for the first 2 days of your main route from Braemar over Jocks Road? Then the weather turns and you've still got the largely pathless high ground between Clover and Tarfside. The answer is that you may, depending on experience, need a separate foul weather alternative for the 3rd day. But of course you're only going to be on the 3rd day of this route if you haven't taken your 3-day foul weather alternative from Braemar, which means that your 3rd day may require 2 different foul weather alternatives depending on where you are at the end of the 2nd day. A little confusing perhaps, so let's look at it in more detail.
As we already mentioned, the first day of this main route from Braemar to Lochallata doesn't need an FWA on its own, but the 2nd day over Jocks Road does. As the natural low-level alternative route starts at Braemar, that's where the routes will diverge. So you need to review the weather forecast before leaving town so that a decision can be made as to which route to take. On the FWA, we'll go from Braemar to Geldeshiel on the first day, then to Sheelin of Mark on the 2nd. The complication comes on day 3 when we may be at Sheelin of Mark needing to continue along the FWA to Tarfside, or we could be in Glen Clover and may need a separate FWA to avoid the largely pathless high ground via Burnt Hill. This is an example as to how we may go about showing this on the route sheet. Braemar, Lion's Face, Invercold Bridge, Forest Tracks to Connacht, south east and east to Geldeshiel, 15 kilometres, 270 metres. Geldeshiel, path to Little Connacraig, track to Spittal of Glenmick, Alt Darari, Sheelin of Mark, 14 kilometres, 540 metres. FWA 1, Sheelin of Mark, Muckle Cairn, Stables of Lee, Loch Lee, O'Croney, Westbank, Tarfside, 18 kilometres, 160 metres. FWA 2, Clover, Loch Brandy, Green Hill, Burn of Slideries, track down Shank of Inchgrundle, join FWA 1 at Loch Lee, 23 kilometres, 810 metres. Whilst we're looking at this route sheet, note the potential accommodation issue on the 2nd day. You're only going to be in Glen Clover if you've been able to take your main route, so that needs to be taken into account before you commit to any accommodation bookings on days when your ability to be in that location depends upon the weather. The same applies if you've got a foul weather alternative that is 2 days long, but your main route is 3. Talking of which, let's just nip back to the earlier FWA examples we gave for the Mamsell Ridge. Here you'll see that the FWA gives a short and easy day, so you may decide to extend that FWA, which may be particularly appealing if the next day is long or hard. If you do have different overnight halts for your main and FWA routes on any day, make sure that you account for the difference in the following day's route description, distance and ascent. Here's just one example as to how you may achieve this.
Always remember that a foul weather alternative isn't finished until it joins back up with the main route. In this example, let's say the main route takes 2 days to get to Braemar via the Larry Grew, whereas the foul weather alternative is 3 days via Glenfeshie. But the accompanying route sheet hasn't addressed the section between White Bridge and rejoining the main route by Mar Lodge. This can be put right quite easily on this route sheet, as the rest day can be sacrificed on the foul weather alternative to cover the distance between Whitebridge and Braemar. But it is a problem that can often require a significant amount of rejigging of a route, where such a disconnect causes the foul weather alternative to become 1 day behind the main route and creates an unrealistically long day to catch up.
As a final top tip, remember that contrary to their name, foul weather alternatives aren't just for foul weather. You may also decide to take your FWA in spectacularly good weather as a feeling weary alternative and enjoy a glen or two under blue skies.
So there you go, I hope that was useful to you. Don't forget that the information in this video can also be found on the Filling in Your Route Sheet page of the TGO Challenge website. And if you have any comments or questions, you can ask them in the TGO Challenge Facebook group, or you can contact the coordinators.